This is Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com. Hope you enjoy this Critical Thought, your daily discussion on game design. And be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and you can pitch future Critical Thought topics. Alright everybody, for today's Critical Thought, there's going to be a continuation from yesterday's, where I talked about the difficulty of defining gamers, and what it means in terms of estimating a market for a given game. And the topic for today is going to be discussing the MMO crash of the mid-thousands and how an industry and developers miscalculated just how much money and interest there was. And this is going to be such a big topic, I'm going to have to keep my drink nearby. MMOs, of course, evolved from MUDs. They're usually called multi-user dungeons, and way before my time in terms of owning a computer. When it comes to the first or the start of the MMO period, the first game would be something along the lines of Ultima Online. There it is, back in 1997. This is of course based on the famous Ultima series developed by Richard Garriott. And Ultima Online, as you saw, was more of the isometric style. And when it comes to the MMO field, the game that really, I guess, jump-started things would be EverQuest, released in 1999 by Sony Online Entertainment, or SOE. EverQuest is a very important game for the landscape of the game industry. This is the title that kind of gave the foundation and the blueprints for MMO design for years to come. Of course, including games like World of Warcraft, but we'll come back to that in a minute. When it comes to the MMO genre, it is definitely a high risk, high reward for developers to work on. A few weeks ago, we did a critical thought about multiplayer architecture. And on the scale of small to big, MMOs are on the big scale. You not only need a team to develop the game, you need one to handle the servers, you need to do server maintenance, and of course you need post-release support. And keep that in the back of your mind because we will be coming back to it in a few minutes. With EverQuest, this was the first of the big mainstream MMOs to show just why the genre can be so alluring for people. And my friend Jamie Madigan is watching, maybe he can remind me of the exact terminology. But when it comes to playing these games, there's, I think, three qualifiers, or three psychological qualifiers, that get people interested in them. The first one is kind of the exploration side. You know, you have this massive world, go all over, do quests, find treasure, stuff like that. Then there's the competitive angle, which is, of course, fight the monsters, go on epic raids, PvP, get the best loot in the game, and all that great stuff. And the third and most important is the social or community aspect. Find friends, get into a guild, meet like-minded individuals such as yourself. And that's a very big one, because it's something that is a major driver of not just MMOs but multiplayer games, but it's not something you can actively control, as in say, okay, you 20 people, you're in a guild, go over there. Developers, of course, have come up with tools and mechanics to encourage and push people together, but it's still something that's directly out of their control. And trust me on this one, the community aspect is a major pull for these MMOs, and this will be coming back in a few minutes. Here's a quick question for those of you who have played MMOs. For those of you who have stuck with an MMO for long term, I'm going to say 2 years and on, for those games, did you join a guild, yes or no? I'm going to bet that most of you are going to say yes. I know I did when I played City of Heroes back in the day. But while EverQuest, of course, sort of brought in what will become the modern MMO, we of course have to mention the game that popularized it, and I think you all know which one that is. World of Warcraft. This is a screenshot I took from the game, and I'm honestly going to say I have no idea what's happening here. World of Warcraft, of course, developed by Blizzard, I believe released in, I want to say 2004. It is so weird when we talk about these kinds of things in terms of how long they've been around for. Especially with World of Warcraft. Yes, 2004. Man, I feel old once again. And World of Warcraft is the big name of the genre. This was obviously developed by Blizzard, and again, it's strange to talk about almost like the pre-World Warcraft era and the post-World Warcraft era. When people were thinking about this, we weren't really going to assume this was going to be an amazing game. It was going to be a good game. This was still before Blizzard kind of became, what it is today. But there was previews of it. People were saying, well, Blizzard, the studio known for making strategy games and Diablo, they're going to be making a MMO based on this Warcraft world. I guess it could be good, but let's wait and see. And then it came out. And my goodness, did the landscape change almost overnight. And World of Warcraft, we could easily spend 20-30 minutes talking about it just alone. But what helped World of Warcraft is, again, that kind of Blizzard touch that was one of the earlier critical thoughts here. Blizzard is one of the most analytical game companies on the planet. These are the guys who will check mechanics and equipment down to the decimal point. StarCraft being the perfect example of it. And when they decided to make World of Warcraft, they pretty much took as many notes they could on EverQuest. What EverQuest do right? What EverQuest didn't do right? How can we improve on things? How can we change them? And what we got was World of Warcraft, and more importantly, we got the official start of kind of this MMO era. And the MMO era basically started right around World of Warcraft, so 2004, and as we're going to talk about over the next few minutes, it kind of fizzled out probably near the end of the decade, maybe even like maybe like 2010, 2011, depending upon your opinions. But the MMO era is when we saw every one of the major developers and publishers wanting to get in on the MMO scene. And the reason, again, of course, is this was long before we started talking about games as a service, the free-to-play model, and we were just looking at this kind of subscription service for MMOs. I think it's like $12 a month was the standard. And with World of Warcraft, Blizzard was making a lot of money. I think they've averaged about 7-8 million subscribers, something like that, a month, over a span of, well, we can honestly say now, over a decade. At this point, Blizzard probably has enough money to literally create a money pyramid in their studio. And even with the costs, World of Warcraft has certainly earned a profit. But that will kind of take us into this next part. Following World of Warcraft's success, as we said, we saw a lot of MMOs being released and developed. If you had a major property, most likely someone was going to try and develop an MMO. Lord of the Rings, Dungeons and Dragons, Star Wars, The Matrix, Age of Conan, Warhammer, Star Trek, and again, for everyone I'm not mentioning, or I'm mentioning, there's probably a few more. I would bet money that if Twilight came out a few years sooner, there probably would have been a Twilight Online developed. But for those of you watching, no one tell Stephanie Myers I just said that. I don't want to put that idea out there. And the MMO scene just exploded. One of my personal favorites at the time was City of Heroes, developed by Cryptic Studios and NCSoft. NCSoft would become another major player of the MMO scene. But, as we have seen over the last decade, the MMOs just did not do well. And this is what will lead us into our previous talk, or go back to that, and reference the state of the mobile industry today. And there are several reasons why the MMO scene just crashed under its own weight. The first is that MMOs are a very demanding game to play. Not just from the time commitment, but of course money. You are spending money every month just to lock in these games beyond just the initial retail. What that means is you have a greater investment in these games. Now, when you stick to one game, that's what developers like. It's why people love it when, or why Zynga loves when people spend $300-400 in Farmville, because it means they're very invested and they're going to keep playing. But when you're trying to build a market of multiple games, having everyone hooked to one game means they're not going to be playing a second or very unlikely a third game. Now, there were some exceptions. I've heard of a few people who did have subscriptions to 2 or 3 MMOs, but generally speaking, they're going to maybe play them on and off. Like, let's say 1 month I play World of Warcraft, then maybe next month I'll play some EverQuest, and then maybe I'll try some Dungeons & Dragons online. But in terms of someone saying, I'm going to subscribe and play World of Warcraft, EverQuest, and City of Heroes every day, every month, that's not going to happen. And this goes back to yesterday's critical thought, and about why there's a difference between fans and consumers. Saying your game has 5 million fans is not the same as a market saying they have 5 million consumers. And this was one of the major red flags during the MMO era. Many publishers and developers were saying, well, I know our game's risky, but maybe we earn half of what World of Warcraft has, or a quarter, and we'll be perfect. But the problem is, of course, if someone's hooked on World of Warcraft, why should they go to your MMO? And the answer, of course, was they didn't, or only a few people did. World of Warcraft became, the metaphorical 800-pound gorilla of the MMO scene. And this takes us to the other major point of why things crashed. World of Warcraft simply outlapped and outpaced everyone. Remember, at this point, World of Warcraft is now about 13 years old. And over that span of time, Blizzard kept changing things. They kept adding it. Every year, they added more and more layers on top of the World of Warcraft design. The expansions, major patches, new raids, equipment, you name it. And what this meant is, for everyone else trying to get into the MMO scene, they were competing with someone with an established brand and months and even years of development over them. Remember, MMOs are not games that you're going to make in 2 to 3 months. Someone says they can make World of Warcraft in 1 month for $250,000, slap them in the head. It's not happening. And what ended up being the case is, for every new MMO coming out, they were immediately being compared to World of Warcraft. And again, at this point, MMOs were coming out maybe like a few a year, maybe every few years. And they were being compared to the guy who's, outpaced them in every step of the word. Or every place, I mean. This also meant that $12 to World of Warcraft gets you more than $12 to Sea of Heroes, Warhammer, you name it, because of all that content later on top of each other. And again, if you're asking people to spend money, they expect something new. And the problem with MMOs is post-release support is very slow, and we'll be talking about that a little bit more in a few minutes. Now, the final point about what kind of led to this crash is that these MMOs just could not sustain themselves. Again, World of Warcraft was pulling in millions of subscribers. And when it comes to the MMO market as a whole, there is no room for average or okay successes. You either hit it big or you're just not going to make it, because the cost of developing, maintaining, and supporting an MMO is immeasurably bigger than just making a single player game or a game with a dedicated multiplayer option. Again, you're creating an architecture that's got to support hundreds of thousands, and in World of Warcraft's case, millions of people playing at the same time. If your game is just barely making even, that's not going to be enough to keep going and growing. And what we saw is developers just could not keep up. DC Universe Online was a really good example of this. They originally launched as being an MMO. And I remember seeing interviews with them saying, fans are going to come to our game. We are going to have expansion, quality content every month, every day, like on clock, or we're going to do this. It's going to be great. Everyone's going to love it. They got 1 month in and they couldn't keep up. And expansion content, that is crazy. For you developers out there in the indie scene, for those of you who worked on early access and attempted doing new builds once a week, that's kind of on par or a smaller version of having expansion content ready in 30 days. And it just didn't happen. Now, over the course of the thousands, of course, we saw lots of MMOs trying to be its own thing. From Age of Conan, Warhammer Online having it more of a multiplayer PvP bent, The Matrix Online with some kind of its like martial arts displays, excuse me, and even space-based MMOs. One game in particular was Earth and Beyond. This was EA's attempt at an MMO, and I'll be perfectly honest with you, I played Earth and Beyond. I have a strategy guide for Earth and Beyond somewhere in this house. I cannot remember anything about that gameplay at all. And this is kind of that thing. It all just became this, big ball or this big mess of MMOs. And what happened is quite a lot of them failed. Whether they crashed after release or they were canceled during development, a lot of people lost their jobs and a lot of companies went under. And some managed to last to some extent, but a lot of them just kind of buckled. There's of course games like Asheron's Call, I think, that went out. City of Heroes went out, which again, that was one that I actually played for a few years. And I just fell out of it and I just never had the urge to resubscribe. And that's kind of the thing. Once someone unsubscribes from your game, it's going to take you moving a mountain essentially to convince them to come back. Because unless you just completely redesign your game, it's not going to do it. Now, while this whole crash was going on, we saw MMOs try to do things differently. Star Wars Galaxy tried to focus more on an economy and community aspect as opposed to just straight up PvE and PvP. We saw, of course, what we're going to be talking about in a few minutes, with other MMOs trying to do something different. And that will actually take us to our next part of this. And I know we are approaching 17 minutes. This is going to be a longer critical thought, because there's no way we're doing this in 10 to 12 minutes. But during the time of World of Warcraft, and again, this imminent destruction, imminent destruction of the greater MMO market, there were developers who tried to do things differently. And by doing things differently, they managed to keep going. And there's three major examples of this. The first was Second Life. Second Life is a game, again, we could easily dedicate who knows how much to it. And I spoke to the owner of the company, I think it was last year. Second Life is a game more about the community aspects above everything else. This is a game where people can meet, talk, they can make paintings, design furniture, build homes, as the title suggests, have a second life. And as we talked about earlier, the community and the social aspects is a major part of what makes MMOs last. As long as you have a community of people who love being there, your game can go on for a very long time, as with World of Warcraft and Second Life's case. And there's been papers and I think talks about how much Second Life has helped people in terms of, living, being able to talk to people, and being able to experience things that they may not be able to do otherwise. It's kind of what worked compared to what they were trying to do with The Sims Online, with having a community, and that just failing like all the others. On the opposite end of the spectrum, in terms of MMO success, we have EVE Online. And EVE Online is a challenging space base with a real economy system or stock markets and just a very intricate game to play. I tried it once and I was just like, nope, I'm not getting into it. And when you throw real money in, the game just became its own microcosm of design and psychology. I've read stories of grand betrayals of companies or corps, which I think is EVE Online's version of guilds, and it sounds like something right out of a gangster film. That's how crazy it was, and it's still going strong today. Before we get to the next one, I need to take a sip. Somebody tells me I'll be taking a few more over the course of this critical thought. And then the third example is Guild Wars. And Guild Wars is a special one. The first game developed by ArenaNet came out during, again, this MMO boom period. And what they saw, again, was everyone trying to be the next World of Warcraft, having these massive development cycles, subscription model, and again, trying to capture some market of World of Warcraft. ArenaNet decided to do something differently. They said, World of Warcraft's over there, let's go this way. We don't want to be anywhere near associated to World of Warcraft. We want to be our own thing. And what they did, which at the time was very radical, was say, you buy our game for $50 and that's it. You get everything that's in this retail package. No subscription models, no needing to sign up for anything like that. We're giving you this complete game right here. You can play it single player, you can have multiplayer groups, guilds, name it, go do it kind of thing. But what we're going to do is I think it was like 6 months to a year, we're going to release an expansion. And our expansions are going to be big. We're going to add new classes, new environments. We're basically going to give you another game on top of this. But it's going to cost you. And the Guild Wars expansions were a premium compared to other ones. I think they usually price theirs at about $40 to $50. Now that may seem insane for an expansion, but remember, you're getting Guild Wars, an MMO kind of game, without a subscription model. So you're essentially saving $12 a month compared to playing World of Warcraft, D&D, whatever. And it worked. It worked so well that Guild Wars is one of the few MMOs to actually have a successful sequel. Guild Wars 2 came out a few years ago with the same model, but with microtransactions on top of it. And I played it for a time, and I really did enjoy it. I'm sorry for scratching my nose so much. Apparently my allergies are really kicking in today. But after this kind of bust, we saw a second attempt at the MMO market. And what happened was developers decided to try a new approach. And that is go free to play. Everyone managed to catch up to what Guild Wars and ArenaNet learned by saying, let's not try and compete with World of Warcraft. And what we saw was this grand migration to free-to-play. The MMOs that were still kicking or still had a pulse moved to a free-to-play model. Lord of the Rings Online, Dungeons & Dragons, Star Trek, DC Universe, and probably a few more. The free-to-play migration, we're already about 22-23 minutes in. If we start talking about that kind of free-to-play design, we'll be here for about maybe an hour. But we talked about this before. It's the idea of adding in microtransactions and monetization designs. Pay or wait, premium content, stuff like that. And while this was considered, people didn't really like having all these little purchases, having no upfront costs and these massive games helped ease the pain there. And titles like Dungeons & Dragons Online and Lord of the Rings Online managed to bounce back and keep going. Same goes for DC Universe Online and The Secret World. And again, we could easily dedicate who knows how many more minutes talking about that. But this was a way of keeping the MMOs surviving and living, I guess, coexisting with World of Warcraft, which again is over 13 years and at this point really shows no sign of stopping unless Blizzard decides one day that they're tired of money. They're tired of seeing the color green, I guess. But when it comes to the MMOs following this bust, this transition to free-to-play in some cases was developed originally, but for a lot of titles became a necessity. Secret World and DC Universe Online, like we talked about, were subscription models at the start, and then it was cancelled. And also Elder Scrolls Online, which is very recent. And what this basically tells us is the subscription model service, unless you are going to do something out of this world, beating World of Warcraft, you can't do it. And again, World of Warcraft at this point is an institution. if you wanted to try and compete directly with World of Warcraft, it would be like being in a 100-lap race and trying to beat someone who is 70 laps already ahead of you. World of Warcraft is just too ingrained, too entrenched in terms of its design. And unless you're going to spend the next 10 years working on your MMO before releasing it, you're just not going to be able to compete. And these days, whenever a new MMO comes out with a subscription, it basically becomes a ticking time bomb of when is it going to go free to play. And this has, in a way, doomed a lot of MMOs, because we've seen people say, well, your MMO looks good, but I'm going to wait for it to go free to play, and then I'll play it. And it enters that sort of self-fulfilling prophecy there. Now, for our final, and I hope this is true, final topic for today's Critical Thought, let's talk about the state of MMOs today, and how developers are trying to do something else different. Right now, we still have the big players. World of Warcraft, DC Universe Online is still going strong, Elder Scrolls, Guild Wars 2, and a few others. And I know for those of you watching this, that I did not bring up the Korean MMO market and their titles. The reason is I don't have too much experience playing them myself. The only one I did try for a time was Vindictus, something like that, a few years ago. But they were kind of different in terms of their design, their approach, and that could easily be another critical thought, or maybe we could have someone on to talk about it with me. But for modern MMOs beyond that, what we've been seeing has been this push towards the games as a service line. And games as a service really feels like an extension of the MMO model. Remember, an MMO is not about a 6-month success or even a 1-year success. These are games that they want people to play for at least 3 to 4 years at minimum. If your game can't get that, it's a failure, essentially, no matter how well it did at release, no matter how high the reviews were. And games as a service is an extension of that. We're seeing games being released with 6 months to a year or more in terms of post-release support to keep people engaged, to keep them playing, and of course, keep them buying. And very recently, we've seen 2 examples of games trying to bridge that gap or try to do something different. And that would be Destiny and The Division. Both are third-person shooters with a strong RPG and the kind of MMO culture and atmosphere built into it. What's interesting is both games really stumbled out of the gates, leading to developers trying to scramble and fix things. Now, I don't know what Destiny is up to, but I can tell you that The Division, of course, sort of bounced back with patch 1.4 earlier in 2016, but it's going to be really telling for 2017 if they can either grow that momentum or if the game will die a second death. For those of you who play Destiny, please let me know in the comments below, how are things going with that game? Is there still a thriving community or not? Because I heard it did okay, then there were problems, and then they kind of bounced back. But to wrap things up with this games as a service model, this is what we've been seeing with also free-to-play games being released today. Again, they're trying to get you in with something that's very appealing and then support things out further if there is a market for it. And when it works, we've seen, again, stuff like Farmville, Candy Crush Saga, and more doing it. But the problem is that, again, these are games that it's either boom or bust. A okay MMO is not going to be a successful one. And what this means for the future is quite fascinating about whether or not we'll see more MMOs being released. I know there was one being worked on by, I think it was part of the team from the original EverQuest, that I think that went out. I think there's been a few cases of MMOs being pitched on Kickstarter, which unfortunately I don't think any of them have actually been released, or they've been cancelled. I think a famous one was that EverQuest MMO. But again, if we start talking more about MMO design, we'll be here for who knows how long. And let's wrap it up here. And I'm not going to do a summary, because we'll be for another 20 minutes if we do that. But thank you so much for sticking with us for this extra long talk about the MMO bust. It's just like an MMO grind. I've simulated the feel for you. If you enjoy things, be sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to pitch a topic, whether it's more about MMOs or something else, be sure to let me know below. And again, be sure to check out this week's Game Wisdom Live around 8 Eastern on Twitch. I'll be discussing the second launch of the Patreon campaign and what that means for Game Wisdom and for the content here on the YouTube channel. If you miss it live, the recording will be up Friday. But until then, I'm Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com, where we examine the art and science of games. My voice is about to die, so thanks for watching, and hopefully it'll be ready for tomorrow, as we'll have more great content then. See you all tomorrow. Well, I'm back for a little bit more talking, even though my voice is dying. I realized after I ended the 30-minute critical thought, there was still one more topic that was very important to bring up, and that was relating the MMO market to the mobile market. And this will probably be another critical thought in of itself, but just to, I guess, tie a ribbon for the talk, MMOs and mobile are very similar in terms of trying to go for the long term and about attracting fans. And as we talked about, one of the things that led to the downfall of the MMO craze back in the thousands was the fact that everyone was assuming that if 10 million people subscribe to World of Warcraft, surely we can get 3 million, or 2 million, or even 500,000. And the problem, though, and as we talked about in the post, is there's a difference between fans and consumer/gamers. The people who will support multiple titles. And the risk of the mobile market is you cannot directly compete with any of these games because you're dealing with someone who is already established and has a huge lead on you. This is why the clones of Farmville, Candy Crush Saga, Angry Birds, and the like never came close to the original game's popularity. And this kind of debate about indirect and direct competition, that's honestly an important topic. I think we may talk about that tomorrow. But before we spend another 10-15 minutes on this, one thing that I'm really concerned about with the mobile game scene is just how stable of a market it is for new titles. Of course, it's popular. It has big name games. But again, can a new game break in? And more importantly, can it succeed? And that is something, unfortunately, I don't know the answer to. As we saw with the MMO craze, the MMOs that did manage to survive were the ones who essentially went against the grain, or specifically went against World of Warcraft and did something else entirely different. And same thing goes for what we're seeing in the modern era with games trying to approach things from the games as a service line rather than as just a pure single player, multiplayer, or MMO. And we've seen a lot of free-to-play games, and again, I'm blanking on them right off the top of my head. I know there's a few of my friends that played Warframe. There we go. That is MMO-like in terms of going for long-term, but it's more of the free-to-play games as a service line in terms of providing new content. But I need to stop this now because my voice really is going to die on me. So thanks again for watching this part. I won't go through my whole speech again for today, but until tomorrow, see you all then. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoy it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and of course share with your friends. It always helps out. For daily posts on all manner of game design and industry topics, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the site and everything that I do, be sure to check out the Patreon campaign. If we can hit goals, it will mean more content for everyone to enjoy, and I'll be able to support myself and my household. If you want to follow me, you can find me on Twitter at GWBycer for updates throughout the day and random thoughts from me. And lastly, you can find me on Twitch right over there at GWBycer for daily streams most nights around 10 Eastern. Thanks again for watching the video, and be sure to check out more great content coming to the Game Wisdom channel real soon.